Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is season 7, episode 19. My name's Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week I'm talking to Carolyn, who travels the U.S. with her husband living in an RV. So hello to the RV community out there listening. We talk about the unique challenges of living in a vehicle 24/7 with a spouse, the effect on relationships and marriage, coping methods like mimicry, some childhood experiences like not noticing miso during cancer treatment, and a lot of other interesting topics. After the show, of course, let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. And by the way, wherever you listen to the show, please head over and try to leave a quick review or rating. It really helps drive us up in the algorithms, which then reaches more listeners. A few of my usual announcements. Thanks for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. And the book Sounds Like Misophonia, a self-help guide to misophonia by Dr. Jane Gregory and I, is out now at anywhere you find books, whether it's online or in stores. This episode is also sponsored by Basal, B-A-S-A-L, a personal journaling app that I developed for iOS and Android. Basal provides AI-powered insights into your journal entries and guides you every day with new writing prompts based on those insights. You can even explore many different therapy approaches, modalities, and philosophies. It's all available for iOS and Android. Check the show notes or go to hellobasal.com. All right, here's my conversation with Carolyn. Carolyn, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
It is nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so do you want to start off by letting us kind of know where you are?
Well, that's interesting, mainly because I actually live in an RV with my husband, a motorhome, and we travel the country. So I'm originally from Ohio, but for the past 6 years have been traveling, so I kind of am more of a nomad at this point and live everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Interesting, yeah, van life. It sounds like okay. And how long you been doing that? Was this kind of recent that you picked up and decided to go?
It was 6 years ago that we started this, and we ended up having to sell our house for various reasons, and then we decided to, instead of buying a new house, we bought a 43-foot fifth wheel, and now we live in a 40-foot motorhome with our 2 dogs.
Wow, cool. Okay. And are you parked anywhere for like more than kind of a night, or is it kind of like you stay somewhere for a while and then you move on?
We stay anywhere from a week to a month typically when we're parked somewhere. Next year will be slightly different, where we'll probably stay for about 2 months at a time.
Gotcha.
But we still want to enjoy traveling and seeing, the U.S. and the various landmarks.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. There's a lot to see. Interesting. So you've been doing this for 6 years. Obviously, people listening are probably thinking, you're stuck in kind of a relatively small space with your partner. You have, I'm assuming you have misophonia. We haven't actually established that yet. But yeah, how is that?
It can be challenging. This is partially why we live in 40 feet of a 40-foot motorhome, is so I can have my space and he can have his. But when it comes to the sound sensitivity and things like that, it can become quite challenging at times. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, okay, so you have misophonia. Your partner does not. Your husband does not.
Correct.
Okay, cool. And okay, and did you? Yeah, I mean, let's kind of tracking the history a little bit. Have you had misophonia since childhood, or was this kind of recent thing?
I don't remember exactly when it started. It was probably when I was in the 5th or 6th grade when I started. When my siblings would be, chewing gum, and that just started creating those feelings of, for the love of God, will you just stop kind of feelings. But as at that age, like, I didn't know what it was, and I just assumed it was just because they were my siblings. And then it kind of transformed into, I just couldn't stand being in the same room when my mom ate. No matter what she ate, like, I just could not be in the same room with her. And it broke my mom's heart. It kind of broke my heart at the same time. And thankfully, she just kind of supported me the best way she could and understood why, like, I ate as quickly as I could and then left the room. And then, like, I still remember being in college, and Reader's Digest did an article about misophonia, and my mom called me and she's like, "You've got to read this article." She's like, "What you have has a name."
Yeah.
And I was,
What year was that? I don't remember the Reader's Digest. I haven't heard of a Reader's Digest article. That's pretty cool.
it would have been when I was in college, so late 90s would be my guess.
Oh, okay. I have to look that up.
I don't remember exactly, but I just remember, like, reading that article and being like, oh my gosh, like, this is me. Like, I'm not crazy. What I'm experiencing with, like, the rage and the all that built up, like, fight or flight response you get, was just had a name. And for the first time ever, like, I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Now what?
So how did that? So I'm curious, sticking on that. Like, did that change your relationship with your mom? Change your kind of understanding of what you were going through?
It did change. My mom at that point realized that, like, it wasn't just me. And and she's always been supportive, even now, like, when I go home and I visit my parents, like, my mom knows, like, it still bothers me. And so she'll be like, she'll eat, like, soft foods. I hate, like, things like that don't make that crunch sound, or don't may have that, like, the triggers for me. So she's very conscious of that. And so she's always been very supportive, even when we didn't know what it was. And what's interesting is, she's met other parents where they'll be like, yeah, my kid can't, like, even stand being in the room with me anymore. And she'll educate other parents. Be like, my daughter does this, and then tells other parents about misophonia. So she's kind of even moved into, like, that awareness and advocate role as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Again, going back to when this kind of started, like, around childhood, like, what about your dad? Was he also a trigger for you?
So, oddly enough, no. I don't, and that's what I find really. I don't know if it's because, honestly, I hid it from my dad. I don't know if he would have been as accepting of it, and even my siblings aren't really aware. They kind of, I think, just realize that I'm just weird in their opinion. But I don't.
Even to this day, they don't get it.
Correct. To this day, they would purposely, most likely, do things to annoy me and trigger me.
These are adults at this point?
Yes. Okay. But they're also my siblings.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. Was there anything going on around childhood that was doing any kind of, I don't know, difficult periods in your family life?
At that time, I can't think of anything that would have caused this. And what's interestingly enough, I said that this started, like, in 5th or 6th grade. Well, when I was in 8th grade, I was actually diagnosed with childhood leukemia. And what I find interesting is I don't remember, during that time period of being treated with cancer, my sound sensitivities, the triggers, the rage that I typically would have. And I don't know, and I've thought about this for a while now, for many years. I wonder if it was because my body was overstimulated with so many other things that my brain didn't process the triggered sounds or something, because I remember my mom being able to eat in the same room with me, um because we were in a hospital room, like things like that. So I don't that's what I find interesting, is during that time period it's like it disappeared. um but it's clearly not gone because it still affects me to this day.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, and it kind of like jazz with kind of what I'm realizing that it's less like some just like a simplistic tangible defect or something. It's more like a conversation between your mind and body.
Hmm.
Like it's some signal of something. Maybe it's a warning for something, trying to warn you of something that doesn't really exist necessarily anymore, or like it's some kind of a misfiring, um, but it's not like a just that like a cut in your arm or a paper cut or something. It's a little bit more complex. There's some interplay between mind and body, and if yeah, maybe if the leukemia is kind of uh, distracting your mind, and misophonia is kind of goes down a little bit. I feel like there's some mechanism there that needs to be explored, and yeah, this is an interesting case.
Yeah, I've always kind of found that really fascinating to some degree.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. And how about like friends at school growing up? And
Um, I basically hid it from everyone,
okay.
um, mainly because I I hate to say it, but I was already like kind of I don't want to say weird kid, but kind of was
Hmm.
the weird kid.
Hmm.
I mean, I had friends, but I always did feel like an outsider.
How
And
so? Were
so,
there other just kind of like things you were interested in, or I'm just kind of curious what made you think you were weird?
um, more or less, just because I don't know. It's not that I was interested. I mean, I was always interested in the same things. I mean, I played basketball, I
Mm.
played softball, I loved
Hmm.
animals, you know, but I just, for whatever reason, always felt that people were friends with me because of who my best friend was, not because they
Mm.
wanted to be my friend per se. So I kind of just hid it from people, and just kind of, because I didn't know it had a name, because I didn't know what it was, I just like kind of grinned and bared it as much as
Yep.
possible. I mean, it's not like when you're in a classroom with people sniffling all around you that you can like yell at somebody, even though mentally that's what you want to do. You just want to be like, blow your nose.
Right.
Um, but like you can't because you're in a classroom setting. So it more or less was in those situations, like me just kind of staring that person down.
The glare.
That yes, that glare you give people, just that that is what I would do to kind of cope with it. Was just like hoping maybe if I looked at them hard and long enough, they'd be like, oh, maybe I should blow my nose. Although realistically now as an adult, I realize it's completely, the glare just makes me feel better. Um,
It's usually a hopeless endeavor
oh,
to
absolutely.
try to will them into blowing their nose.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
What were some of your coping methods around that time where you were, I guess in class you can't do earbuds and headphones, but I don't know, I don't know, did you pretend you have to go to the bathroom or just kind of grin and bear it?
I honestly, at that point, I would just grin and bear it and give them the glare because there was
Yeah.
nothing I could do. I mean, this was back in the late or mid 90s. So like
Hmm.
headphones weren't an option that you could have, like earbuds weren't an option. It was more or less just being completely distracted by what was
Yeah.
going on around me because of them.
Did your teachers know that? Did you hide it from everybody? Like no teacher
Oh, the only person who
knowing
knew it
and
was my mom.
okay, okay, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, I hid it from
Um,
everyone, and I just kind of, and I think to some degree that's why I don't want to say I cope with it 100% now. I still obviously have my rage moments, but I think that's partially why I can get through things as an adult, because when I first realized I had this, I just kind of grinned and bared it.
okay, so you've kind of normalized that, um, just kind of bottling it up.
Yeah, and hiding it
Yeah.
from the world.
Yeah. When you went out into the world after, after school was done, then how did it, how did it affect you as you're, getting jobs and whatnot?
Um, it it doesn't. What's interesting is it's one thing I have found is the more I overstimulate my brain when that sound is happening, the more I can
Mm,
cope with it. So, for example, like my husband, I love him to death, but when he eats crunchy foods, it drives me batshit crazy, and he knows it. Okay, how long are you going to be eating the crunchy food? Because mentally, I need to know. I need to put a time frame on this, and I also need to. If
hmm.
he's eating crunchy food and I eat crunchy food at the same time, it doesn't bother me as much because I'm hearing me crunch over him eating him crunch, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. That's the a lot of us use mirroring as kind of a coping method. Sometimes without even eating anything, just kind of making that motion can kind of help a little bit. But yeah, but if you can make a sound that kind of like drowns that out, I think it's like it has to do with some kind of a sense of control that kind of like balances whatever's going on in our head.
Yeah, and even having like TV on in the background while we
Mm.
eat is
Yeah.
helpful. Just again, that overstimulation, because when I'm out at restaurants, him eating does not bother me because
Uh,
of all the noise around us at the same time. My for whatever reason the triggers aren't there because again of that overstimulation of the brain. And so I've kind of mimicked that into my everyday life. And it's like, okay,
hmm.
if we're going to eat, let's eat with the TV on. Or if,
Yeah.
watching something. So this way my brain is focused on that more so than it doesn't work 100% of the time, but it works enough that we can eat in the same room.
Yeah. Do you in restaurants? Yeah, I totally get that whole background noise, and that works a lot of the time for me. But also, my some of my triggers are throat clearing and coughing. And if someone at the next table is doing that, then it's kind of like very difficult for me. I'm curious if that's also something for you, or if it's maybe more just kind of like individual chewing sounds.
It's more or less individual chewing sounds, although if somebody is sniffling,
Mm,
that the
yes.
sniffling is one of my triggers, and I am just like I can tolerate. I've built up a tolerance to almost all my triggers, so I can tolerate something to a certain point.
Yeah.
As my husband now laughs in the background, um, but once I
After
hit
that point, though, you want to run them over with your motorhome, basically.
yes, and once I hit that point, I literally have to. I typically just remove myself if I can from
Right.
the sound. Go to the back part, shut the door in the RV, or just go to the other room so I can't hear him as much or see him eating, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But he's gotten to the point where I feel horrible. It does honestly affect our marriage, and I do feel like a bad wife sometimes because there'll be times in the evening. Well, we're God bless him. He'll be like, "Can I eat something right now?" It makes me feel horrible that he has to ask that question, but it also makes me feel good that he's willing to ask that question. And
Right.
so, and he knows, like, again, I have a tolerance. So he knows that, like, I can basically tolerate it for maybe 3 to 5 minutes.
Right. Right.
And he can eat whatever he wants in that 3 to 5 minute range. But that 5 minutes, even at like 4.5 minutes, I'm like, "Are you almost done? Are you almost done? Like, how many more do you have?" And I laugh about it now, but it's unfortunately my sad reality of this is I have to laugh about it. Otherwise, I'm going to, cry or go into that full blown rage because I have been into full blown rage when I've lived in apartments. And
Hmm.
another sound for me is deep bass.
Oh yeah.
Um, And I cannot tolerate deep bass at all. And I remember living in an apartment when I was in college, and my neighbors would watch movies, and it just would drive me insane to the point where I was like jumping up and down on the floor and basically like crying and yelling. And if I heard deep bass, I would have to run outside my apartment and figure out, okay, where is it coming from? Is it because a neighbor's watching a movie? Is it a car driving by?
Yeah.
And if it was just a car driving by, it was like, okay, it's going to leave in like 2 seconds. But if it was a movie, I literally would be like, okay, well, I just have to go somewhere for 2 hours because I can't be in my apartment right now. Like I'm going to go, I'm going to completely lose my mind if I stay in my apartment while they're watching this movie. And so I would just take my dog and we would just disappear for like 2 hours and then come back. And if the movie wasn't over, like my heart would start racing again and be like, oh my gosh, like, for the love of God, how long is this movie going to be? Like, and I mean, I just remember like crying in my apartment sometimes because the people who I lived around just, you know, they didn't know, and why would they? I mean, they have every right to do what they want in their apartment, but it did really affect me.
Did you know that those experiences kind of like inform your decision to, you know, live in an RV? I mean, now you can basically move your home. If you had that back then, I mean, if you heard that bass, you would just like
honestly, like
meters.
What it did was I always had to live on the top floor. So this way I didn't have people like on all sides of me, and I always had to have a corner apartment. So this way I only shared walls with like 2 people, and I was only above one more person. So I kind of always did that. And then in the RV, the nice thing with the RV is we move frequently enough that if we have really annoying neighbors, like we can leave. But my husband has become really good when it comes to deep bass, especially at night. He can tell by just the look on my face that I am about to go off on this person, and he will go outside and he will kind of go talk to that individual and say, hey, you know, your music is too loud. Can you please lower it? And so he kind of takes control of the situation because he knows it's better that he do it versus me, because I'm not going to do it in a nice way at that point.
No, we don't. Yeah. You don't want to approach us when in the middle of a trigger.
Correct. And so, but it hasn't happened a lot, but it has happened enough that those situations do really affect me. Because in a way it makes, even in the apartment, I think what it did was it made your apartment is supposed to be your safe zone. That's supposed to be where you go and relax. And what those noises did for me was it took away that safety of my apartment.
Right. No, absolutely. And when you're now in the RV, are you in RV parks? Is that where the sound is coming from?
Yeah.
That your husband's going? Okay, so it's like a neighboring RV and they're just blasting something. Okay.
Or it could be like an RV literally across the freaking RV park that I'm hearing the sound, and he's like, I hear nothing. And he calls me bionic ears. I get it. Yeah. I love him, but there is a sad truth to it because I pick up, my brain automatically focuses on those sounds.
Right.
In those situations, and you know, I immediately, like, again, I can tolerate it for like, you know, a little bit, but when it doesn't go away and I don't have a time frame of when it's going away, like if I can get a time frame that this is going to end at 10 o'clock, okay, like I can just grin and bear it till like 10 o'clock at night. But like at 10:01, if it does not shut off, I start, you know, and my husband has seen me cry because I'm just so, like, I know I can't go yell at these people and go off rage-wise on them like I really want to. and so I end up just crying because it's
Right.
my only way of doing it.
Has to
Because
release somewhere. Yeah.
yeah, you can't, you have to control the rage somehow. And so that's kind of what I do.
Did have you ever talked to like a therapist or professional at all about this? Have you bothered to I don't even try that? Like most of them don't even know, but I'm just curious
I have
if you've
thought about it now that it's becoming more of a understanding, and there's organizations out there, and there's like conferences about misophonia, and more and more people are willing to talk about it. I've honestly thought about it, but I never have.
yeah,
I
it's
think,
very common. You're like most people. Yeah.
yeah, and what's interesting is an old classmate of mine from high school, I was telling her about, I forget how it even came up in conversation, but I guess her daughter has it, and they can't even use
Hmm.
real plates in the house. Like, they eat on paper plates because the scratching of the
Hmm.
fork sound or the
Oh yeah.
utensils. And like, so I ended up meeting up with her daughter, and being like, I just want you to know you're not like the only one. And that's part of the reason like I decided to do this and do this podcast, was because
Hmm.
I think one thing that for me was, I always figured I was the only one. Like, who else would have, go from 0 to, 6 rage within like 30 seconds when hearing a sound, That's not normal. And so I just figured I was just, again, really sound sensitive, because again, there was no name when I first started for me. So like, when I heard people talking about this, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I'm not, in my opinion, crazy. And so, if people can hear my story and be like, you know what, I can relate, then that makes me feel good, because then I'm at least helping one other person.
Oh no, you'll be helping a lot of people. Trust me, I get a lot of messages from people who mention past things that they've heard, or tell me like, I just finished crying for hours, binge listening to some of these episodes. So yeah, people definitely relate, and it impacts them. So I know this is going to help a lot of people too, especially the RV crowd. I haven't had a lot of RV people, but oh yeah, that's interesting that you told your friend. My next question was going to be like, your mom's a big advocate. I'm just curious now. Are you telling more people that you meet, or friends, about
um,
misophonia?
I have slowly told other people, mostly friends that I feel would understand. I honestly think, aside from maybe 3 other people, aside from my husband and my mom, really
Hmm.
know, because it's just, again, it's somewhat embarrassing to be like, I can't handle you chewing like that. To tell somebody that, there
Right,
is
right.
uh, there's an embarrassment in saying that. And the nice thing is, everybody that I have told has been very understanding and accommodating. Like, when I go home and I have dinner with the one friend, she's like, you pick the restaurant, is this going to be too much for you?
Hmm.
And so she's very
Hmm.
accommodating. I think partially because she understands her daughter. Um,
Right.
but typically, and my husband has occasionally, said things to, I don't know how much exactly he's told his family, but there's times, we're at family gatherings and I just have to leave because of all of the noise that is happening in his parents' house, or especially around Christmas time. They have this family tradition where they make, what's called gobbledygook, and it's basically like Chex Mix, and it's like so crunchy
Yeah, I
that
was gonna say.
everybody is eating it at all different times, and it's too much for me. Like, I am like, okay, I can tolerate this for like, again, 3 to 5 minutes, but like after that, like, I just have to like excuse myself from the room and like go
Yeah.
back to the other room, or like go outside and play with the dogs or do something. And again, I think he just kind of chalks it up with his family as of like, Carolyn is bionic hearing and, kind of
Mm.
thing. I don't know how much his family truly understands or even knows that it is actually a thing, like that it has a name, misophonia. Um, but again, it's that embarrassment factor of this is just, I don't know,
Yeah,
for
it sounds
me,
so dumb. It sounds dumb, and it gets wrapped up in shame and guilt. Those words come
yeah,
up a lot on the podcast.
I don't, and I grew up with my, brother and sister kind of being like, just get over it, just,
Yeah,
just, it, why does this
just
bother
don't think about
you?
it. Yeah,
Yeah, just don't think about it. And it's like, I, I, I wish that was so, I wish it were that easy, because even like, especially people like chewing gum, like even if I don't look at them, but I know they're chewing gum, like just the visual sometimes, especially with that one, is just too much for me.
yeah. Visual triggers. I was going to ask you too. Like misokinesia is definitely a thing. Is that like yeah? What is that something that that affects you too? And kind of when did that kind of pop up
Honestly,
for you?
that is only really with gum. Um,
Okay,
Anything else, I visually wise, I'm fine. But if I see somebody
you can
chewing
watch your
gum,
family eat Chex Mix, and it's fine as long as you can't hear them.
yeah, if I can't hear them, it's totally
Yeah,
it's totally fine. But if I see somebody chewing gum, I think it's that like anticipatory, like, okay, at what point are they going to start
right,
like chomping it? Are they going to blow bubbles? Are they going to do this, that, and the other thing? And once
right.
I realized, like, I was just at a conference, and the person sitting next to me after lunch started, she pulled a piece of gum out of her purse, and I was like, I'm living in hell. And I mean, that was literally my first thought was, this is my hell right now. And she started chewing, and she was very quiet, like you didn't barely notice it. And I was like, okay, thank God, like I can deal with this. Like, but it was
Yeah.
that immediate feeling of crap. Like, I'm gonna have to deal with this for the next, basically 2
Mm-hmm.
hours. And then that relief set in when she wasn't one of those like noisy gum chewers.
Okay, okay. Yeah, right. So it feels like I don't know, your part of you um de-escalated the threat level. It
Yes,
just feels like,
it
you're something happens and your brain thinks you're in danger, imminent danger,
well, and the
and you
thing is,
just need that danger to go away.
even though I knew she was kind of chewing it quietly, I still had to like check in and look at her occasionally just to make sure
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
she was
I
still
know.
being again, as stupid as this sounds when you talk to people who don't understand it. For us who deal with this is a sad reality of how we
Mhm.
cope. And again, how you said it exactly, for whatever reason our brain is like, you're in danger from what? Because they're just chewing gum. I don't know.
Right.
But my brain is in this like, and it won't let it go. Like,
Right.
if I hear one of those triggering sounds, it's like my brain like just waits for it to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Mm-hmm.
has to like stop for like a good, like, I don't know, at least 30 minutes before I can be like, okay, it's not going to happen again.
Yeah. So there is definitely a recovery time um,
Yeah.
after your trigger. Yeah. Um, I was gonna, yeah, going back to kind of like, people that maybe I don't know, don't take it seriously, or you don't think they're gonna take it seriously, or they've shown signs that they don't really, are empathetic to this kind of thing. And you don't have to mention like particular people, but I'm curious, like, are they, did anyone know have like similar, not similar conditions, but other mental health disorders like anxiety or OCD? It's just interesting how um, you know, other things are taken more seriously, and we're kind of like embarrassed about how, about what we go through.
I think there's a truth to that, but I think as more people come out, like I saw on Facebook
Hmm.
yesterday, you had done an interview, I believe, with Lisa Loeb, um,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I saw that on Facebook or on one of the social media pages, and I was like, wow, like never would have thought that she deals with this, and it kind of made me. I tagged it. I didn't have time to listen to her story, but it was just one of these things. Like I think with any sort of illness in general. The more it gets talked about, the more people will be willing to at least understand it. And I have slowly, like, in the rare disease kind of illness months kind of thing, I'll just kind of mention slightly like the sound sensitivity. And I think I've actually even posted like I put a little frame around my Facebook picture of like misophonia awareness, not really diving into what misophonia was and just letting people see that and being like, if they want to know what that is, they can go Google what it is. But it's always one of these, like, again, I have just learned to adapt. So because I've just learned to adapt, and I'm now, 43 years old, so I've been living, most of my life just coping with it, that it's easier for me to change my behavior than it is for me to ask them to change theirs.
Right. It's less risky. I mean, because you can control yourself. It's less risky than
I think that's true. It's a control factor. So I can control my behavior easier than I can control someone else's.
Right. Sometimes we just want to fly off the handle, but yeah, it's easier to focus on one person yourself. At least try to. Sorry, go on.
And when I do hit those rage moments, it's just easier for me to leave the situation versus
right.
And so I just find a way, an excuse to, go somewhere or leave the room, or, I have to go upstairs and, check on the laundry, or I'm just going to go upstairs and do this for 10 minutes and I'll be back down because I figured 10 minutes is a good enough time for you to eat or eat
I have
everything.
to do something upstairs. It just involves just standing.
Yeah.
Doing that thing. I was going to mention, the lethal lobe might be interesting for your friend too, because not only, she actually, she said something on Twitter, and that's how I kind of connected with her. And she really kind of wanted to be part of the community, like to also be an advocate, because not only does she suffer from, her daughter has got it pretty bad too. So it's a family thing for her that she deals with all the time. So it might be an interesting one for your friend to listen to as well, because she talks a lot about how she and her daughter are dealing with it.
I'll have to pass that on, because like I said, I haven't listened to it yet, but that would be good for her.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, no, and you're right. I mean, it's as more of these stories come out, and that's kind of why I'm just kind of whipping these out every week. It's just like, it's almost like performance art. I'm like, just, hey, there's no end to this. Like, I can bring somebody out every week, every day, pretty much, and you're gonna hear these I don't want to say insane, but like very intense stories that are so similar between all of us, and it just needs to be normalized. People don't have to like completely change their life to kind of accommodate, but there are simple things people can do, and so this is just this call is going to be definitely another step towards that.
And I will say,
go on.
I do remember when my husband and I, we were, just dating at the time, but we moved in together, and we shared a wall. So we were in a townhome, and the person who lived next to us, like, snored. You could hear it through the walls. It was ridiculous. And my husband, and at the time, like, we had just been dating, so it's not like I had really, like, opened up to him and been like, oh, so by the way, I have, like, misophonia, and
you can't eat during these times.
So, like, I basically would sit watching TV, listening to the person literally in the house next to us, and I'd be like, and I literally would tell myself, I am safe, I am okay. I am safe, I am okay. I am safe, I am okay. And I would just say that, like, over and over and over again. And so I've used that technique to kind of prolong that like 3 to 5 minute tolerance range. I've occasionally used that mental like mantra to like extend that time frame. It doesn't like make it go away, but it will extend it for like another like maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Like,
Yep. No, absolutely. It goes back to kind of like something in us is trying to warn us of some danger. In good faith, it's not like some weird defect, and so whatever we can do to kind of calm it down.
mhm.
Yeah, I do that as well. I try to do it before I get into a trigger situation because it's a little bit easier to kind of like mentally prepare a little bit. But yeah, during the trigger, if you can do
I've
it,
never,
that works too.
I've never thought about doing it beforehand.
Like if I'm going to a restaurant, because sometimes restaurants do trigger me.
Hmm.
But or just kind of sitting down to eat dinner with family, like I'll try to remember to kind of like as we're setting the table and stuff, just to kind of remind me that I'm not about to get attacked and jumped on and whatever what have you. So can kind of help a little bit. What about for kind of work? Have you worked in offices before? I'm just kind of curious how you navigated that.
I've, I am actually a recreational therapist, child life specialist, and so when I used to work in nursing homes and in hospital settings, and I don't necessarily remember it happening with many of my clients. And
Hmm.
I think again, because in those situations, especially hospital settings, there's so much stimulation and so much I had to keep track of like, okay, like what time is it? I have to pay attention to the alarms. I have to do this. I have to do that. And
Right.
that again, one thing I've noticed is when my brain is overstimulated, the triggering sounds don't affect me as much. Now the gum thing will always, no matter when, where, or why, that is my number one nemesis trigger. Um,
Hmm.
but like generally speaking, I can typically get through a work day without that. I now don't work in that field. I kind of do more remote work.
Hmm.
Um, but it's one of these things, like I do a lot of Zoom meetings. And there's
Hmm.
times, again, if somebody is chewing gum on the Zoom call, I just
Yeah.
want to
Oh
jump through
God.
the computer and like strangle them. But I know I can't because A, you can't jump through a computer. And so I just kind of like not look at them.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm always like, can you mute? Can you please put yourself on mute?
For the love of God, please mute.
Like, so this way I'm not hearing that specific sound. And and what's interesting is it's only, and again, with misophonia, it's only certain sounds. Like, not every sound is triggering for me. Like, there are certain like repetitive like clicking noises that I find honestly relaxing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, if I can, if it is a repetitive sound, it becomes more of a relaxing sound for me. It's this sporadic, like when I don't know when the sound is going to happen,
Yep.
that it's the, for the love of God, like just stop, like
Right.
feeling.
Yep. Yeah. No, I definitely hear you there. I think I have a mix of both. Like there are some constant sounds that I'm like, oh, this has to stop. But yeah, definitely the anticipatory is a big one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so when is this one transient sound going to happen? Um, Very cool. So are you planning on just kind of like, well, it sounds like your living conditions are going to get a little bit more, slightly more stationary, going into next year. Is that going to change your, work situation? You can just kind of keep going remote and it's been
I
kind of working for you or,
I'm just going to stay remote just because
yeah.
um, I honestly prefer it at this point. But it's, as much as I do love, like, being with friends and doing things and being around people. I am a people person, to some degree. But it's, and again, I don't think the misophonia really affected me in the workplace because there was always so much sound and noise
Yeah.
going on around me. It's kind of like the restaurant situation. It was only when like we would sit down in the lunchroom and like it would just be
Oh
me and one
God.
person. Then that would be like my living hell, and I would just again get up and just go eat outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when it comes to the living situation, like I just, I cope by living on the RV, and thankfully my husband, I don't want to say he completely understands, but he tolerates it. as best as
Mm-hmm.
he
Mm-hmm.
can.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I feel horrible when he is like, "Can I eat something?" Um, the fact that he has to ask permission just breaks my
Right.
heart, because that's not normal, and he shouldn't have to be like, "So can I, if I can I eat an apple, or can I eat applesauce?" Like,
Right. 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 Um, I mean, so you guys, yeah, you guys have traveled to a lot of places around the country. I'm curious, do you have, kind of um, anecdotes or warnings, or places to kind of that are actually good, maybe for misophones, good and bad? But have you had kind of like um, you know experiences across the spectrum that are worth mentioning, maybe?
honestly, I think, just getting out in nature, because especially, when it comes to nature, for a lot of people, the nature sounds aren't as triggering as
Right.
people sounds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you don't, so I find that, when I'm out on a hike, again, I'm more stimulated by the sights I'm seeing, and stuff like that. So the misophonia isn't taking effect like it normally would, because it's just me, my husband, and nature.
Right.
So, take advantage of, like, the trails and the tranquility of the nature around you, and just focusing on. I mean, again, I teach grounding skills to my clients. I teach them how to, stress management and things like that. Yet I myself, like, doesn't always work for me. So it's like I'm teaching people skills that I struggle to use and implement
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, the one thing is, that does work is, when in nature, like, focus on, like, okay, I'm hearing birds, I'm hearing planes, I'm smelling, the certain flower or tree nearby, or, what am I seeing? I'm seeing, leaves and bunnies and branches and bark and grass, and, like, so I'm engaging all of my senses versus
Mm-hmm.
just the auditory sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that raises another point that I've been kind of like thinking about, is this kind of yeah, it's just related to our how we treat our senses just kind of being out of whack. And is it, to go with the cliches, it's kind of part of our modern life kind of thing, where we're kind of not paying attention the right way to certain senses due to kind of our built environment. But I don't know.
Hmm.
That's a whole other conversation. But bottom line is, yeah, you're right. Being, yeah, for me too. Like, just being out in nature is absolutely refreshing on many levels.
Yeah, and I've done, when I worked with, especially in the hospital setting, we used to have a biofeedback program that we
Mm,
used, and I actually have a portable biofeedback. It's called HeartMath, and I've always wanted to try it to see if maybe I could change how I respond, especially like when my husband's eating and things like that. Um, but at the same time, I've never done it, and I don't know if it's because I'm afraid it's not going to work, or I'm afraid to have to deal with the sound while I'm trying to get myself to
mm-hmm,
calm down. Um,
mm-hmm,
because again, it's just easier for me to flee the situation, and just
right,
then to deal with the emotions and the rage that comes with whatever that sound is.
right.
And I also have
Um,
found that the more stressed I am with things going on in my life, the more I'm reactive to sounds. When my life is calm, my tolerance level is a lot better.
yeah, that's a pretty common thing, and for me too. Like, if you have a good night's sleep, if you're relatively, low on stress, money wise, career wise, things are
Mhm.
a little bit better, then yeah, I can. I don't know if it's like um, the triggers are not as intense, or just my recovery, or just kind of how I handle them is a lot better. Whatever it is, it definitely helps. Um,
Mhm.
your body realize that you're not in, yeah, you're not in danger. Um, Interesting. Yeah, cool. Yeah, Carolyn. I mean, yeah, we're getting close to an hour. We've covered a lot of stuff. Yeah, you had some good tips, obviously, about nature and or stress and whatnot. Anything else? I guess you want to share with people who are listening um, about your experiences and what you've learned.
I would say the one thing I have learned from dating my husband and also marrying my husband um, is when we were dating, I hid it from him. If he was
Mm,
eating, I would just go to a different floor of the house. And he really never knew the extent of the misophonia. And then when we moved into the RV and I couldn't just go upstairs to a whole different part of the house, um,
yeah.
it became more relevant. And he once did say to me, and it broke my heart when he said this, like, had I known, I probably wouldn't have married you. And so I think being honest and upfront, especially in relationships, that hey, I have misophonia. This is what misophonia is. These are my triggers, kind of thing. This is what you can do to help me, and just being open and honest, especially with your intimate relationships. Those types of relationships is really helpful. Um, honestly, even telling my friends about it would be helpful too. But I'm not at that point yet. Um, but definitely with your intimate relationships, I think being honest is the best course of action.
Yeah, no, you're right. But like you said, we're in that phase of misophonia awareness where we still feel so embarrassed. It's just such a struggle
Mm-hmm.
um, to figure out how and why, how if and how we should do that. Did you did you think about? So I'm just curious. Like, is this something you thought about when you were making this decision to live in the area? 'Cause it sounds like you hadn't really told your husband at that point. Was this kind of like something that you were calculating?
So when we moved, so the whole like moving out of having to sell the house and moving into an RV happened very quickly. Um,
Mm,
and we had talked about RVing like part time, like being snowbirds kind of.
hmm
And it honestly didn't dawn on me the effect it would have living in an RV because I've always just been able to go to a different part of the house and hide it from people. So it didn't even dawn on me that in an RV I wouldn't be able to do that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's raises another point. Was sometimes we just don't like to think about it. That sometimes I surprise myself. I'm like, crap. Why did I think about misophonia in the situation I'm in? Like I should have known. Um, but I think it's like, yeah, just sometimes it doesn't come up when things, like you said, are happening so fast. And
yeah,
we generally don't like to think about it.
and there are times like he can start eating and it doesn't bother me, and then all of a sudden, like a couple minutes into him eating, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna kill you.
Uh,
Like,
yeah,
so again, I think because I've lived with it for you know 30 years at least, um, I've just learned how to deal with it, and it's just become a part of my everyday life. Oh, I'm just gonna go flee the situation because it's easier.
yeah,
Um, and so again, living in an RV, it didn't even wasn't even a thought in my mind how that would affect things. And
right.
again, thankfully, my husband loves me enough to understand um, as much as he can.
Gotcha. Well, no, that's great. Maybe make sure to end it on that positive note. Carolyn, thanks for coming on and sharing your story. This has been great.
Thanks for having me. This has been a pleasure. I've been an advocate for childhood cancer people and patients and survivors because of my history, and I've thought for many years of kind of eventually being an advocate for the misophonia population as well. And this is kind of in some way my first step into that role.
Thank you again, Carolyn. Excited to hear you're planning to do more advocacy around this in the future. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website, misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast, follow there, or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. And on Twitter, good old Twitter, is Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Theme music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.